Hello everyone, welcome back to Yarn Church. Today I am starting a new series about starting and ending projects, so cast-ons and bind-offs. And the reason I'm doing this series is because a lot of you all wanted to see it. There was interest from folks who watch these videos and also just folks that are in my knitting groups. The subject of cast-ons and bind-offs has come up quite a bit lately, and personally I want to be more mindful as well of how I started into my projects, and I could use a little bit of a study of cast-ons and bind-offs. So what I'll be doing is going through various starts and ends to projects. I use a lot of the same ones over and over again. I don't always use the same one. I would say that I probably, compared to the folks that I talk to in real life that knit, I probably use more variety of cast-ons and bind-offs than a lot of other folks. But even I feel like I get a little bit into a rut of doing a long tail cast on or always doing a tubular cast on. There's maybe just a handful of cast-ons and a handful of bind-offs that I use for pretty much everything. And cast-ons and bind-offs are not all purpose. So you can really get a more polished project by choosing the right cast-on or choosing the right bind-off. So during this study that I'll be doing for myself, and I'll be sharing kind of my journey with you all, I'm going to be using this book called Cast On Bind Off by Cap C's. I really like this book. I use it as reference quite often, but I haven't really gone through this book mindfully and kind of working through the whole thing. There's a lot of cast-ons and bind-offs in here that I've never done before. Most of the time I'm using this book as a reference for if a pattern calls out a specific cast-on in the pattern. And but I want to have kind of a working sample guide and also kind of know what my hangups might be for different cast-ons and bind-offs. There's a little bit of a trick to some of them, and kind of get my hands on it, take some notes on what I might want to do differently next time. As I knit my swatches, what I'm doing is I'm going to knit a very short swatch, so not very many rows. And for all of these swatches, I'm using the same worsted weight yarn. This yarn is just yarn from my stash that someone from my knitting group gave me that was left over from one of their projects. And I've got quite a bit of it. It's also in a color that does not look great on me. So I wasn't anticipating using this in kind of anything that I would wear near my face. And so, but I do like looking at it. So I thought this would be a good yarn to use for this project. All of it's going to be in this yarn. All of them are going to be 20 stitches across. So I'll cast on 20 stitches. I will knit a stitch pattern that I think works well for the cast on or bind off, and then I'll bind off after a few rows. So I think and then what I've been doing is kind of tying on labels to the swatches when I'm done, so that I have kind of this library, and here are the swatches I knit for this week's episode. I just have kind of a pile of these that I want to be able to go through and say, okay, this is what I did. This is the cast on. This is the bind off. And I'm hoping that as I have this library, I'll be able to choose the right cast on and bind off for the project. And hopefully, since I'll be recording this and recording some of my notes and observations, hopefully this benefits you as well. I encourage you though to knit along with me as I do these cast-ons and bind-offs. It didn't take very long to make any of these swatches. It's just 20 stitches across, You could probably get away with 10. I actually was tempted to switch over to 10 a few times, but I thought 20 gives me a chance to see if I can get into a little bit of a rhythm and like how rhythmic does the cast on or bind off feel over time. Today I will be going over a long tail cast on, a chain cast on, a standard bind off, and Elizabeth Zimmerman's sewn bind off. The reason I'm choosing these these two pairs is that the long tail cast on is the most common cast on, I think. It's the one that I learned first. I think it's one that a lot of folks use as their default. And then I chose the Elizabeth Zimmerman sewn bind off because that's supposed to be more kind of the matching bind off for the long tail cast on. Before I started this video, or before I recorded these myself knitting these swatches, I had actually never done Elizabeth Zimmerman's sewn bind off, but I really like it. So and then the standard bind off is the bind off that I think a lot of us started out learning, and it certainly was the first one that I learned, and it used to be my default bind off. The reason it isn't is because it's not very stretchy. At least for me, when I do it, it's not very stretchy. I really struggle to do it loosely, but if you want a firm bind off edge, it works really well. And part of the problem with it is that it doesn't match the long tail cast on very well. But if you wanted to do that sort of firm bind off, there is a cast on that matches the standard bind off, and that is the chain cast on. And so that's actually how I chose those four, is that they match each other. The standard bind off, which is the most common beginner bind off, and it's matched the chain cast on, and the long tail cast on, which is the most common beginner cast on, with the Elizabeth Zimmerman sewn cast bind off, which is the most common bind off. So without further ado, I'll get into the swatches. Starting out with the long tail cast on, the first thing you'll see me doing here is measuring out how long I need the tail to be. And I'm doing this by wrapping the yarn around the needle I'm using. And I'm going to wrap it around 10 times. I want to cast on 20 stitches. So what you'll see me do is wrap it around 10 times, space them out about as far apart as you would want the cast on stitches to be spaced out. And then, good, now that we've got that length, that's 10, here's 20. And then I think I considered doing more than that. So if you wanted to measure out 40, that's what 40 would look like. I'm just going to stick with my 20, and then you add some length for the tail. I don't know that I added enough length for the tail, which you'll see kind of towards the end here, but I add on my slip stitch here, and then add that to the needle, and that counts as the first cast on stitch. Now you want the tail to be in the front and the working yarn to be in the back. Start by making a slingshot where the tail is over the thumb, the working yarn's over the index finger, and then you'll go through knitwise under the thumb yarn, pull through the finger yarn, and pull tight. And do that again. You'll go like you're knitting, pull through, and you keep going. So now we've made 4 cast on stitches. One of the tricks with doing this cast on, long tail cast on really to keep in mind with any sort of cast on or bind off or knitting in general, is how stretchy that is. Depends on how far apart these stitches are, what's the distance between the stitches, or what's the length of the yarn between. And so what you'll see here is I'm kind of holding the stitches apart a little bit as I'm casting on, and that helps the long tail cast on or any cast on from being too tight. And that's kind of the trick there. If you increase your needle size, that increases the loop size, but it doesn't necessarily make the cast on any stretchier. So the trick here again is keeping the space in between. And you'll see you'll see that illustrated maybe a little bit better in some of these other cast on techniques that I demonstrate. But and this is why I said at the beginning, I think maybe I needed a little bit longer tail. So the tail is a little short here. It's making it a little awkward for me, but I managed. Now this is the same swatch after I've knit a few rows of garter stitch, and I'm doing the regular standard bind off here. So the standard bind off starts, of course, by knitting 2 stitches, and you'll see me fiddling a little bit with the yarn. It's a little bit splitty. And then pulling the first stitch over the second stitch. That's really all there is to it. Then you knit 1 more stitch and pull the first loop over the second loop. The trick to this bind off being a little bit less firm is to not stretch out that first stitch when you're pulling it over, to not stretch it out too much. It will pull the previous stitch really tight when you do that. So you try to be kind of loose as possible. And you see me, I'm trying to make it a little bit worse actually and show you, so you can kind of see before the stitch before it got really tight. So don't want to stretch that out. Try to stretch it out as little as possible. And now the rest of this, I'm actually trying to not make it too tight. I typically end all my bind offs the same way, which is after I've made the last stitch, I cut the yarn and just pull that loose end through the last loop and make a little bit of a knot. That's it. That's the end of the bind off. And what you see with the long tail cast on and the standard bind off is the standard bind off is just really not very stretchy compared to the cast on. So an alternate that matches the long tail cast on, and I have another swatch here that I did a long tail cast on, a few rows of garter. It is the Elizabeth Zimmerman's Sewn bind off, and it's the bind off that's supposed to best match the long tail cast on. So once you thread your needle, the first thing you do is put your needle purlwise through the first 2 stitches and pull tight, and then put your needle knitwise through the first stitch and pull it off the needle. Then go through, then basically repeat that over and over again. Go through purlwise the next 2 stitches, pull it tight. One of the terms I gave it was mindfulness. Knitwise, so the point that it's making is mindfulness as pull it off. Knitting encourages purlwise through the next 2. And care. I do like the idea of encouraging care. Of course, one of the values that we're seeing trounced of late is empathy. And knitwise, pull it off. And just repeat this down the line. Something you don't see me doing here is pulling very tight, and you'll see me kind of straightening out the stitches and making sure that they stretch. This is a fairly stretchy bind off, and actually the issue that I had with this one, which maybe you'll definitely be able to see this at the end, is that this actually ended up too loose because I was so careful to keep it from being too tight. You actually don't have to worry too much about it being too tight. Now, as we look at these 2 swatches, you'll notice that the stretch of the sewn bind off matches the stretch with the long tail a lot better than the standard bind off does. But it also doesn't look as neat. I decided to try this again and try to make this look a little bit neater. So what you'll see here is as I pull the stitch off knitwise, I am pulling the yarn very, very tight. I had to catch myself a few times. It's just kind of my habit. I do a lot of sewn bind offs, and it's my habit to try to kind of stretch them out afterwards. And I had to really fight that habit on this. Very important to pull the yarn very tight if you want it to match the cast on tension. You see, it's still pretty stretchy. It's just I'm just trying to make this look a little neater. Now, as I finish these last few stitches, you can see that even though we pull very tight, we still have a relatively stretchy bind off, much stretchier than the standard bind off, but still very much neater than the first time I did the Elizabeth Zimmerman sewn bind off. The next cast on is the chain cast on, which is meant to match the standard bind off. And here I'm using a size 5.5 millimeter crochet hook, or an I-9. I'm doing my starting off again with a slip stitch, and then I will put the tail in front, kind of, and put the working yarn in the back of the needle, and then take the crochet hook and pull a loop through the first loop over the needle. The awkward part here is you then need to take the working yarn and put it behind the needle again. And essentially you're making a crochet chain where the knitting needle is through the back kind of rib of the crochet chain. So if you crochet, you theoretically could do a crochet chain and then pick up the kind of the back rib, or the back loop of the chain, and call that your cast on as well. This is kind of the equivalent. This is maybe a little bit stretchier than doing it that way, especially using this size crochet hook. The needle size I'm using here is a size US 7, which I think is a 4.5 millimeter. And this crochet hook is a 5.5 millimeter. What ended up working better and making a neater chain cast on edge that more closely matched my standard bind off was using a size G crochet hook, which is a 4.25 millimeter crochet hook that matched the so maybe a size slightly smaller than the knitting needle size is what you'll want to go for. As I wrap up the standard bind off, you can see that even though the cast on and bind off look the same, the cast on is a lot looser than the bind off, and that's because I used that larger crochet hook. And you can fix this by going down a few sizes or by chaining and then picking up the back with the knitting needle. This is a photo of the two swatches that I knit, both with a chain cast on and standard bind off. The swatch in the top is the one that you just saw me knit in the previous clip. The swatch on the bottom I cast on using a size G crochet hook. These two swatches illustrate how the stretchiness of your cast on or your bind off is determined by the length of the yarn between. The crochet hook size does not change how big the loops are that you're casting on, but it does change how far apart the stitches are. And so you see that the top one, the bind off or the cast on, was a lot stretchier, and in the bottom one the cast on was a little bit less stretchy and a little bit more firm to match the firmness of the bind off. And so going down a little bit on the hook size helps match up the bind off a little bit better. Just to review, I have in front of me all of the swatches that I've knit for this video. First one was the long tail cast on with the standard bind off. And the issue, this looks fine actually, but there's a little bit of an issue where the standard cast off or the standard bind off is not quite as stretchy as the long tail cast on. So if you want something that matches, you've got to change either the cast on or the bind off. And that's pretty much what we've done in this video, is go over the different bind offs and cast ons that match either the long tail cast on or the cast ons that match the standard bind off. So the first one I showed you was the bind off that matches the long tail cast on, which is Elizabeth Zimmerman's Sewn bind off. And this is the one with kind of my natural tension, where I gave the yarn a little bit of space while I was sewing it in, kind of stretching out the completed stitches as I made the next ones. And as you can see, it's very, very stretchy, but it's also not very neat. it's kind of holy, especially on this side. It's got kind of a loose gauge, doesn't quite match the cast on. This side maybe looks a little bit nicer, but you can tell that the loops up here are larger than the loops down here. And so I tried this same bind off by with pulling a little bit tighter, and you see it is still very stretchy. The cast on and the bind off, I would say, are equally stretchy. But this finish looks a lot neater, and this does match the cast on a lot better. Next, I tried to match the bind off with a different cast on. So I'm gonna turn this back around. So this is the standard bind off on both of these. I used a chain cast on for both of these. This is the first swatch that I knit, where I used a size I hook, which is 5.5 millimeters, to do the cast on. And as I talked about in the earlier in the video, because the crochet hook determines how far apart the cast on stitches are, and the larger crochet hook makes this cast on stretchier or larger, and therefore the loops are further apart, and so the bind off here was had loops that were spaced according to the knitting needle, which was significantly smaller than the crochet hook, which resulted in the swatch kind of curving upward, since the bind off is tighter than the cast on. To more closely match the gauge, I switched to a size G crochet hook, which is 4.25 millimeters. And all of these swatches have been knit on a size 7 knitting needle, which is 4.5 millimeters. This is 4.25 millimeter crochet hook. My knitting needle is 4.5 millimeters. So I went down a little bit more in the crochet hook, which I think makes sense, because my tendency is to stretch out these bind off stitches as they're being bound off, which actually causes them to get tighter. So because I've this bind off tends to be fairly tight for me, I went down a little bit further than what you would maybe expect. So the knitting needle size is a little bit larger now than the crochet hook size, and I think this matches pretty well. It's not a totally inelastic bind off, and it's not a totally inelastic cast on, but the elasticity matches pretty closely, and definitely the finish looks identical, which is nice. If you're still with me, thanks for watching this far. I hope that you'll try some of these cast-ons and bind-offs for yourself, and maybe create some of these your own swatch library as I'm doing. If not, I hope you enjoy watching along as I learn. If this is something that you enjoy, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can catch the rest of this series. I'll try to make a playlist with all of these as well. So if you're catching this after the videos have been posted, you can follow along the series that way as well. Thank you all for spending your time with me. Hope you all have a great week, and I'll catch you next week in my regular podcast. Bye.